afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here at Innovation Zero, surrounded by climate innovators and technology enthusiasts. I'm Natalia Kuniewicz. I work for SatVu, a company that provides high-resolution thermal data from space. By harnessing the latest developments in satellite imagery, and I think a panel earlier today touched on the subject, it was purely focused on space technology. We know that we can leverage a potential of technology that was not available a decade ago, for example. We've seen advancements in optical imagery. We've seen SAR imagery also getting more and more popular for measuring climate change and other types of applications. The benefit of it is mainly down to objectivity of data that you can get. So anything that is coming from external sensors that are very objective and globally scalable can be applied to a more rigid monitoring. SatVu specializes in thermal imagery. We capture data in mid-wave infrared, that is between 3.4 to 5 micrometers in the electromagnetic spectrum. And the variety of applications we can use the data for ranges from monitoring heat emissions from industrial facilities, monitoring urban heat island effects, but also to understand the energy consumption patterns and to try to use available resources better. So today, through a range of examples coming from our sensor that is deployed and is currently in orbit, I will try to explain to you the potential use cases that we can enhance with our data. But firstly, I would like you to understand the difference between the available Earth observation modes. One is optical. This is the one that you might be familiar with from Google Maps, for example, when you overlay the map with a visual image. It's very good for describing the properties of a structure from the outer structure of a building or the terrain, but it's got its limitations. One of that is that it needs daylight to provide clear results. Then we've got SAR imagery, which can also be very helpful in describing the outer layer of the structure. We can detect ships, boats in the sea. We can see whether there is any damage that was made to a building or a critical infrastructure. But it's not going to provide any more added information. When we match these types of data with thermal data at the level of granularity provided by SatVu, we might be able to say not just that there is a building, but also that there is activity happening in the building. It's a type of binary detection. So we can say if the building is hot, there might be some activity happening inside. If it's cold, it's not, there is no activity. So thermal data existed before. It's not something that is foreign to the industry, but it never existed at the level of resolution available at the moment through SatVu. We provide 3.5 meter resolution, which compared to other commercial satellite data providers is a huge technological leap. The other data sets describe 100 meter in 1 pixel. So we are the only ones who can see the granularity at that scale. This is the nature of thermal monitoring, that we can provide data at day and night. Our sensor does not really differentiate between the two periods of the day. And the sensor has a video capability, so it's not just single static images, but also the ability to provide videos up to 60 seconds long. It can be useful to detect any changes, any movement. We can also define the speed at which something is moving and the direction in which it's moving. We're very familiar with a few use cases for thermal data that is currently provided by drones or planes, but it's got its limitations. These solutions might not be scalable because to employ a drone or a plane, you might need air traffic control permissions. You might need to plan that journey in advance. With satellite data, we can reach any area in the world every 3 to 5 days. So any new kind of application can arrive to anywhere in the world and can be tested in different regions. There is some bad news I have to deliver today as well. It's that after the successful launch of our sensor last year in the summer, unfortunately, it experienced an anomaly. So it's no longer able to produce fresh data. The images that you will see in the presentation today and the use cases are very relevant to our next sensor that will be launched early next year, and the second sensor also planned to be launched in 2025. But at the moment, and it's unfortunately the nature of space technology, we can't send anyone up there in space to fix it. Yeah. And we remain the only provider of high-resolution thermal data until now. I will now focus on the key use cases for thermal data that I've described. One of those is around economic monitoring. We identified that there is a niche and a need for the industry, or at least an interest in measuring activity at a plant or sub-plant level. This might enhance the level of understanding of production of certain commodities or petrochemicals. Sorry, it doesn't seem to work. Yeah. So when we're looking at a facility with the level of resolution that SatVu can provide, we can establish a baseline threshold of activity, which is the normal behavior of a production. When something is off, it means it's not working, there is no activity, so we might not expect that there will be the expected amount of a product entering the market at the end of a cycle. It will have an impact on commodity prices, so we're currently servicing that as one of our client base. This type of data has increased value when it's collected over time with multiple revisits. As I mentioned, there will be the need of establishing that kind of normal behavioral pattern for a facility to detect any disruptions in the supply chain. Now, when we're talking about power generation, this is also of critical interest for global for the governments, and especially when we're taking under account the looming threats of increasing energy prices. This data can help understand the fluctuations in certain regions. Now, the last example will correspond to the use case of monitoring faults at utility-scale solar farms. Currently, the operators and managers of solar farms rely on annual surveys delivered by drones or planes. So these are very infrequent, happening only once a year. And the expected or estimated amount of loss of energy yield is around 4%. With our data that is less granular to what the industry is used to, we can deliver data more frequently, but not at the same level of detail. So in theory, we would be able to capture the faults that are at a very early stage, and before they start propagating and contributing to the loss of energy generating potential, these can be fixed. I will now move on to the set of use cases related to climate resilience. As a company, we share the goal of contributing with our data to the adaptation or mitigation efforts against climate change. Temperature and climate change are interlinked. I don't think this is a surprise for anyone. We know that we will be expecting increased heat spills in in an increased amount of regions in the world. One of the most frequently talked about use case is around urban heat island effects. These are the events where the temperature in a certain area within a city is much higher than its surroundings. It happens because the radiance is trapped by the pavements. It gets trapped in narrow streets, and it's very difficult for it to disperse. It will have fatal effects. The heat wave in 2022 caused globally around 70,000 deaths. With our data set, we are able to explain or at least pinpoint the coldest or the warmest areas in a city and inform better the governments or city planners on the regions where that problem is the most dire. This example from Fresno in California shows exactly that, and the change that a fig garden that you can see in the center of the image can make in a city environment. One more example of the use case linked to climate resilience, but also biodiversity preservation, is the deforestation. It's quite difficult to identify those events, but we know that there is increased rigidity coming from investors towards their suppliers who want to be sure that the product that they are putting in the market is not linked to any of those events of deforestation. It's quite difficult to get a reliable optical imagery that would be describing the problem or capturing it. With thermal infrared data that SatVu provides, we can detect the loss of canopy. So we're looking at soil which has different thermal properties because it's not covered by the thick, dense leaves. And one more interesting example is around wildfires. This is a huge problem currently touching Canada, Australia. We know that we can also expect those happening in Europe, and the last few summers that we saw had some devastating consequences for the biodiversity and happened closer and closer to where we are. With one sensor in orbit that only revisits any area in the world every 3 to 5 days, it will be quite difficult to respond accurately to those events or to capture those. But we're hoping for a constellation of 10 satellites so that revisit rate will be near hourly. And then the last thing that I wanted to mention is thermal contamination. Any industrial facility will use some sort of cooling water reservoir and then dump it into a larger water body. These events are also regulated. With our data, we can monitor that at a global scale. And finally, as a data provider, we developed a data delivery platform. So using or tasking the satellite is fairly easy. It can be done through a website. Comes in a very simple format of a GeoTIFF, which is very easy to use with open source software. And then finally, just to iron out the timeline for us as a company, after what happened to our first satellite, we're anticipating the launch of HotSat-2, so our next sensor, early next year. And we're planning a constellation of 10 sensors. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask or find us at stand H92 or drop us an email. Thank you very much.